Churches can be interesting places, and it can be a nice place to come for peace and quiet, bit of solace. But the most important thing to know is you can be framed and stitched up and set up as much by a congregation as you can by a community. And with any frame or fix assassination, it always has a starting point. No matter how deep or how dark or how black the frame goes or how long continues, there is always a starting point. Now for me, I was in this Christian community church, fellowship there for 10 years. And my mother became a Christian, and she went out to Kenya, Kisumu, to work with street children and orphans. And I know there's some principles that apply to all of us. One is the unexpected when you least expect it. That's very prevalent in life. You see examples every day, and we've all probably had examples of the unexpected happening to us when we least expect it. And the other thing that's true for all of us is in any given moment, on any given day, your whole life can change. The direction of your life, just something can happen. Might be a phone call, might be someone you meet, might be something you see, might be a career change, but in a single moment on a day, something completely turn around the direction that you're going. There are lots of examples, a few examples in my own life, but for instance, if we think about Spider-Man, he's a normal guy going around his business, and the next minute he's bit by a spider, and his whole life changes. And then if you think of Bilbo Baggins in The Lord of the Rings, he comes into possession of a ring, and his whole life changes. The direction where he's going changes the lives of the people around him, people he's associated with him, and this mammoth task quest begins just because he's come into the possession of this ring. Now for me, my mother had gone out to Africa, Kisumu, Kenya. She had visited friends there and been really moved by the plight of the street children, very young street children abandoned on the streets and wanting to go and make a difference in their life. But on this particular day, the phone went, and it was my mother on the phone from Africa, and she sounded very shaken. And she just had a big scuffle with the leader of this gang called Jaffa, a Yardie gang, and they weren't youths, they were all in their late 20s. And they threatened that the next time they saw her, they were going to burn her alive in her car. So this was completely out of the blue. She also said to me, Johnny, we've got headless bodies coming down the river in Raqqa into Lake Victoria, because just across Lake Victoria, which from this, that would be like Lake Victoria's the size of England, so it'd be like from this to Wales, genocide was taking place on the horizon. And so I said, okay, Mum, leave it with me. So I spoke to the elders, and the leader of this Christian community church. I asked if they'd pray about the situation, and I was also praying about the situation, whether I should go and support my mother and whether I needed to go. Because I had been in Kisumu before my mother went to Kenya, and I'd been there during civil uprising and tribal warfare between the Prestons tribe, who were well armed, well fed, who were pushed in against the Lur tribe, who are in Kisumu and around Lake Victoria. And I had been stood 100 metres from huts that had been burnt down with the families in, or families were massacred trying to flee, people shot on the streets, no electricity, no phone line. So being in an African, Kisumu is quite a big town. I wouldn't say it's quite a city, but it is quite a big place. And you got your slum areas too. And when you've got mobs on the rampage, curfews, no electricity, you're in the pitch black, and for a woman to be on her own in that kind of situation, I know trouble can spread very quickly. One day in Africa can be peace, and the next day it can be war. All hell can break loose. So, I prayed about it. I was doing a milk round at the time, and I was over at Rushall. And when I used to go around delivering the milk, I used to always have a quick look at the headlines in the newspapers. And I went to Home Farm, just past Rushall Church, and it was a Guardian newspaper in there, and there was the headline story was how 50 youths had gone into a children's home, not that far from my mother's children's home. And first they'd robbed 17 nuns who stood between them and the children in their care. Christian courage, Christian love. And then these 50 youths with machetes hacked them to death. And then put all their bodies, some of them still half alive, down a narrow shaft which is used for a toilet. And when I read this, standing there at this box, I had a real witness in my spirit. This trouble is going to be big. It's on the horizon. Certainly could spread. So took that in. Then I went a little bit further in the milk float up past the council houses in Rushall, and I found myself behind a Ford tractor, a butcher's van, and the Ford tractor had a spreader on it. Now, Ford Kenya was the opposition party at the time in Kenya, and their stronghold was Kisumu. So you got a Ford tractor, and you've got Ford Kenya, which is the big opposition party. You've got a spreader on the back and a butcher's van. Obviously, people were being butchered and massacred in the thousands daily, on the horizon. And the trouble was spreading. So this kind of got my attention too. I thought, right, Lord, you've got my attention. I'm still praying whether I should go. I'm ready to go at the drop of a hat. And then later on, I come to Dickleborough, and I come to the top end of Dickleborough, pulling out on the main Diston Norwich Road, and a minibus goes by. The first vehicle that passes, there's a minibus, and that's for an employment agency, but it's got one big word down the side of this minibus, is the word urgent. And I just knew that was God was confirming I was to go, and I was to go urgently, emergency. And sometimes you do with your loved one. When evil is on the move and when evil is manifesting, sometimes we have to be on the move too, for your loved ones, for those you love and care about, your friends, even those people you don't know. If you can stand in the gap between them and the evil that's on the move. And the other thing with Kisumu, before the times I'd been out there a couple of times, when your phone line went dead and when you lost your electricity, you knew that it wouldn't be long before all hell would break loose, the trouble would start, the mobs would be out on the street. So it gave you a little bit of a window of opportunity to move yourself into a good position, because you didn't want to be trapped in the wrong place at the wrong time. If you can get ahead of the curve and be in the right place at the wrong time, that can be the difference between life or death. So I said, right, okay, Lord, I really do feel you confirming I am to go. So I went home, booked a flight to Kisumu, Kenya, talked to Graham Kingfisher, my boss at the mill ground, said I'd be off for a couple of weeks. Had Philip who could replace me. He said, yeah, that's okay. I was owed some holiday too. So now I went to the elders at DC3, Roy Lincoln, the Roy Lincoln lawyer, Simon Newbury, God bless him, no longer with us, and said, I'm going to Kisumu. If you want to put that in the home groups so people can pray about the situation. Jaffa and his Yardi gang have threatened to burn my mother alive. But if you can, and also in the home groups, if anyone wants to join me, wants to come with Kisumu. Because my idea of going there, Mum was in the worst place. She was in a place called Dunga, which is right just off the slum area, and that is where there would be a lot of trouble. If trouble did flare, if things caught momentum there. So my idea was to go in and we could set up a safe haven somewhere outside of Kisumu in a better location for her and the 30 children in her care, just to get things prepared. Once trouble starts, too late. You cannot go anywhere. You can't get in or out of Kisumu. So if you can get in with time to just set things up and make sure things are in place and you've got provisions, so even if you do get trapped in there, at least hopefully you can stay in a compound and you've got the resources and you don't have to go out, people and opportunists looking. So anyhow, I went to speak to the Roy Lincoln lawyer and said, look, I'm going into Kisumu Sunday, and their reply was, well, you're not to go, we don't want you to go. So I said, well, I really do feel God has confirmed to me I'm to go, and I'm to go urgently. They said, no, you're not to go, we do not want you to go. I said, well, I'm sorry for whatever reason you feel this, but I've already booked the flight, and my flight's on Sunday, and I am leaving. I was just going to see if anyone wanted to come with me. So the reason they didn't want me to go, they'd sent Tessa and another young gal, Tessa Carriage, and another young gal into Kisumu. It was a very different ministry to my mother. They were running a nursery, a separate ministry, also supported by DC3. And they were thinking that if their parents heard that I'd gone, that would cause them undue concern and distress. Well, the other thing is, as I say, I'd lost a good friend, Philip Hewitt, who'd come round on the Wednesday. On the Saturday, his car had overturned in Roydon. Not very long before this, his car had caught fire and he was trapped in his seatbelt and they couldn't get him out. And for Philip, the Lord did give me Psalm 18, tangled in the cords of death, yet I called upon the Lord. So even though he wasn't saved in this life, I knew he was saved in the life to come. And the other thing, I'd read in a Sun newspaper, where in a fairly no-go area in London, where even the police really don't venture in too much, this Yardie gang had got this woman and burnt her with a hot clothes iron to find out where her drugs and drug money was. And first they'd burnt her on her body with a hot clothes iron, and then they'd stuck it on her face. So evil, as I was saying earlier, the unexpected when you least expect it. Evil can manifest anywhere, anytime. It's not just Africa, it's anywhere. Evil can manifest. And if God tells you to go, then it is time to go. So the other thing with DC3 and the elders, which I thought was a bit out of order, then they tried to blackmail me and say, look, if you do go, then we will stop the financial support to your mother. And so I had nothing to do with the financial support. I did buy my mother's house from her in 2 stages. The other quite an interesting thing, I was in DC3, that was a full church and they had a guest speaker. And he asked me to stand up in front of everyone, and he'd got a word of knowledge through the Holy Spirit, through God's Spirit. And he said, the Lord is calling you to run a hostel for homeless young men. And he will release £26,000 for you to start this ministry. So I thought, yeah, okay. And this came to pass. So I bought my mum's 4-bedroom house, 41,500 through the Norwich and Peterborough Building Society, but I bought it in 2 stages, 26,000. And then I also set up, as I was going in, and there was a lot of trouble spreading, so we set up a safe haven. I had another chat with Norwich Peterborough. The other 15,500 could be released to my mum, so she would have, everything in place, and so she wouldn't be trapped in Kisumu. But I never touched any finance, anything to do with her charity. That was all handled by DC3, who were now telling me that if I went, that they would stop the finance to my mother. Which I said, well, I'm sorry you feel like that and you feel you have to take this action, but I'm not deterred. I am going. I have booked a flight. Really feel strongly God is telling me to go, and I will be on that plane Sunday. So I left it at that. And the other thing too is I'd lost my dad. We'd had, prior to my mum going to Africa, we'd had 3 bereavements in 6 months. My dad had died with Hodgkin's disease. He'd been diagnosed wrong 3 times by this health centre. Said he'd got glandular fever, lymph glands, the flu, but he'd actually got Hodgkin's disease. And because of the time delay and the wrong diagnosis, by the time they did find out what was really wrong with him, that spread to his livers and kidneys, so he didn't have a fighting chance. It was game over. They gave him 6 months to live, but bless me, lasted a year. But in the end, he looked like something out of a concentration camp. He was a big guy, 6'4". He went down to nothing, like a skeleton, bless him. But his last words to me were, Johnny, please take good care of your mother. And which obviously you would, being the only son. You would always look out for your mother, and mothers are very special. Play a very special role. I'm not a mummy's boy, but mothers do play a very special role, and your dad's dying request is, please take good care of your mum. So, and then I lost a sister, unfortunately, in very tragic circumstances. Another situation, the unexpected when you least expect it. Another moment, unfortunately took an overdose, and I was the one who found her. So that was a real heart-churning moment. So when you've lost people really close to you, and then we also lost Mum's mum. This was all in 6 months, and she had lung cancer, but she was a real old fighter. They'd only given her 6 months to live, but she lasted 2.5 years later, died peacefully in her sleep. So when you lost people who are close to you, plus I'd lost dear friends, in circumstances out of the blue, the unexpected again, when you least expect it. Jonathan Crosby, Freddie Sweeten, all like brothers to me, Ted Pretty. Just one day everything can change. No one knows what a day can bring. So as I said, cheerio to the Royal Lincoln and the elders, and made preparation, got the things I needed, and then I was on the flight on the Sunday. But the reason I'm saying this is to say you can be sold out. It always reminds me of Joseph and his brothers in the Old Testament. His brothers were jealous of him because he was his father's favourite, and they plotted to kill him. That's your own brothers were plotting to kill him. But Reuben, I have a son Joseph and I have a son Reuben. But Reuben in the Old Testament, he intervenes and stops Joseph's brothers from killing him. So they put him down a hole, which is a nice thing to do, from your own brothers, And that's another thing that Jesus says. A man's enemies will be those of his own household. You can have enemies in the community for sure, but Jesus actually says a man's enemies will be those of his own household. So sometimes you haven't got to look too far or very close for people who are stitching you up. And so Joseph was put down this hole, and then he's sold into Egypt by his brothers, and he's bought by a captain. And God has given this vision, of quite grandeur, of his brothers bowing down to him, which really puts their noses out. They're not only just jealous of him, but when he says about this vision that he's had, that they're all bowing down to him, this is like the final straw for them. They want him to disappear. So a captain buys him, a captain of the guard in Egypt buys him, and if things go all right for Joseph, people can see God's hand, God is with him. And then the captain's wife wants to have sex with him, and really comes on to him, and he's not going to entertain this. So he pushes her away and he flees the scene because she's really coming on to him strongly. She grabs his cloak, and because of his rejection, she then cries rape. He tried to rape her. So now Joseph, sold out by his brothers who are plotting to kill him, sold as a slave into Egypt, bought by this captain. Now the captain's wife is framing him and setting him up, for attempted rape. So now he's put into prison, on a sex charge. That he's a rapist, or tried to rape her, which is not a very good thing to be in prison for. And then while he's in prison, there are 2 men in there who have these very vivid dreams, and Joseph interprets the dreams. And sure enough, everything comes to pass. So it can be a strange journey God can take you on. You can be framed, you can be fixed, you can be set up, because God's got a direction, and he's going to put you into a situation. And then the Pharaoh has a very vivid dream. He has a dream of a fat cow coming out of the Nile, a really big fat cow. And then in the same vivid dream, he has a very lean cow comes out of the Nile. So the Pharaoh asks all his wise men and magicians and occultists, if they can interpret this dream, and no one can. Well, one of the men who Joseph interpreted his dreams when he was in the prison was in Pharaoh's court. So he went to Pharaoh and he said, look, while I was in prison, there were two of us, and there's a man in the prison who interpreted our dreams, and exactly what he said came to pass. The God of the Hebrews gave him, the revelation, and sure enough, exactly what he said came to pass, for me and for the other man. Maybe you should see if he can interpret your dream. So the Pharaoh calls for Joseph, and sure enough, God reveals to him the revelation what the dream is about. And the dream means that Egypt is going to have 7 good years, very good years, good harvest, everything. But during these 7 years, they've got to fill their grain stores. They've got to prepare, because following these 7 years is going to be 7 lean years. It's going to be a dire famine. And so Pharaoh, puts a cloak on Joseph and more or less makes him his right-hand man. So going from being sold out by his brothers, falsely accused of rape, being in prison, now he's second to Pharaoh in Egypt, and he oversees, the following harvest, and he's God's man in God's position, and he also brings his brothers and the Israelites, the Hebrews, into Egypt during this time of severe famine where they would have perished. So Israel is saved and Egypt is saved, all because Joseph interpreted this dream. He was in the right place at the right time. So sometimes, and we think of Samson too. Samson was certainly a bit of a wild one, and didn't do everything by the book, but God still had a big plan and a purpose for him. And even though his secret, his supernatural strength, he was betrayed by the woman that he loved, Delilah, and his strength was taken from him and his eyes were burnt out, he was then put into the Philistine temple, who were mocking him and scoffing him. And he's placed by the pillars, and he asks God to give him his strength one more time, and he brings the temple down on their head. So your path can put you in a place, it can be an unusual place, but then God puts you in a place where you can push the pillars down, where you can, be instrumental in saving a lot of people. You may have been accused, you might have been sold out by your church, your family, your community, you might have been falsely set up. But for me, the big disc, Sandringham serial killer frame, the frame and the fix, the starting point was at DC3, Disc Christian Community Church. Okay, and we'll carry on later. God bless.